Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for this kind invitation to come and speak today about diet and what is the role of diet in the prevention of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and cognitive decline. Outline of my talk. I will first say a few words about the scope of the dementia challenge that we are facing today. I will go through the observational evidence that we have for the link between diet and cognition and dementia. There's much less of trial evidence, but there is some, and I will also present you those, and especially I will present some of the findings from our Finnish finger trial. It's a multi-domain trial which has one component is diet there. And then in the end, a few words about the future studies. This is the challenge that we are facing. It is estimated that today there are about 50 million people in the world living with dementia. And just because there will be more and more old people in the coming years, so it's estimated that there will be more than 150 million people living with dementia in 2050. So it's a big challenge if we don't know how to curb this epidemic, if you say. Currently, there are no treatments to cure dementia or even to stop the progress of dementia. So there's lots of emphasis now on finding means to prevent dementia. Dementia is a syndrome. It's the main cause of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. It's about 70% of all dementia that is Alzheimer's. But there are also other causes, and especially among the very old people, it's very common that there's both Alzheimer type of pathology, but also vascular changes in the brain at the same time. There's been quite active research on dementia risk factors in observational studies during the past 30 years about, and many risk factors have been identified. And today it's very clear that it's a mixture of genetic factors and lifestyle factors. And Alzheimer's disease is a multifactorial disease. There are many of the risk factors are shared with other chronic diseases, with cardiovascular diseases and diabetes. Here in the figure, unhealthy diet is indicated as one of the risk factors. It's a risk factor on its own, but it's of course influencing also many of the other risk factors, especially the vascular factors. We know today that the pathological process that leads to Alzheimer's disease and dementia starts very early. About 20, 30 years before you have any symptoms, you already start to accumulate the first changes in the brain. So it's a very long process. And that's why we need to think about the prevention also very early in life. Not when you have the first symptoms, but much earlier. There's been quite a lot of studies, observational studies, that have been investigating the link between diet and then the risk of developing cognitive decline or dementia. If you want to read more, I would recommend there's a review by Nicolas Carmeas, quite recent review that is very, very thorough. And the figure on the side of the slide that you can't read is from that review, so if you want to read more. In the first things that were on the focus of dietary research were nutrients. First studies were focusing on, for example, vitamins, especially B vitamins, folate, and then vitamin E among the antioxidants has been quite a lot of studies, studied some food groups as well. But what has been really the main focus of diet and dementia studies in the past, let's say 10 years, it's been really on the dietary patterns. And among the dietary patterns, it's the Mediterranean diet that has been repeatedly shown in many studies that having more Mediterranean-like dietary pattern is linked to lower risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. It's not the only dietary patterns. There are also DASH diet, for example, the healthy Nordic diet. There's also a couple of studies on that. What is common to these dietary patterns? They have many similarities. Lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grain products, and good quality of fats. Those are the key components. I would maybe like to mention the MIND diet. It's the more recent one. It has been developed specifically to be more brain-focused dietary pattern. It has many similar, it's sort of a hybrid with Mediterranean and DASH diet. It has many similarities, but it has some specific components as well as, for example, emphasis on berries and emphasis on dark leafy vegetables. It doesn't have so many studies yet, but it's more and more. It's theoretically it's interesting, and I'm really looking forward to see what comes out from these studies in the future. How is diet related to cognition and brain health? There might be these indirect effects. So diet has a role for many other risk factors. Diet plays an important role for lipids, for blood pressure, for obesity, for diabetes. But dietary factors may also have really direct effects on the brain. Possible mechanisms that have been suggested are antioxidation, anti-inflammation, the impact on endothelial function and mitochondrial function. Also on cell membrane maintenance, for example. Just recently there was a study showing that people who are more following a Mediterranean diet have less development of amyloid plaques in their brain. And amyloid plaques are really the key feature, pathological hallmark in Alzheimer's disease. So there might be many mechanisms that the diet can function. But that's from observational studies. What about trials? Trials are much harder to conduct. And evidence so far is quite limited. When you run trials, you have many questions that are quite challenging. What is your target population? What age group? What kind of intervention do you need? How long intervention would you need? So it's not that straightforward. When we think about dietary factors, the first trials were done with supplements. So supplements of vitamins B, folate, E, some antioxidants, omega-3 products. Mainly these have been negative, so the primary outcome of these trials has been negative. They have not been able to prevent cognitive decline. But they have been conducting some sub-analyses. So for example, in really high-risk groups, for people who have low vitamin B levels or high homocysteine levels, so those people might benefit a bit from supplementation. Same for omega-3, so people who are lacking might benefit from supplementation. But these are sort of positive indices, but not really a confirmation yet. Trials where you actually try to change the diet, not give a supplement. The only dietary intervention so far is the Predimed trial, which was a trial with primarily designed for something completely other outcomes, not for cognition. But there's a sub-study in the Predimed trial as well, a small sub-study that is showing that there might be a beneficial effect also on cognition with this combination of Mediterranean diet plus olive oil or nuts. When it comes to randomized trials, in the past years there has been more and more interest and focus in multi-domain trials. If you remember from the earlier slides, so it's a multifactorial condition. There are many risk factors. So it's quite plausible that the most effective intervention would be the one where you try to target many risk factors simultaneously. There have been so far 3 large trials that have been completed here in Europe. MAPT here in France, Prediva in Holland, in the Netherlands, and FINGER in Finland. FINGER was the only one where the primary outcome was positive. The primary outcome of MAPT and Prediva were negative, but also in these trials, you could see that in high-risk subgroups, in post-hoc analysis, there seemed to be an effect of this multi-domain intervention. But in the next few slides, I will speak a little bit more about the FINGER trial, and especially the dietary aspect of the FINGER trial. FINGER was a 2-year trial. It was a randomized controlled trial. People were randomly assigned to either regular health advice or to a multi-domain intensive intervention group. People who were in the intervention group, they received an intervention that had nutritional component, exercise component, cognitive training component, and vascular risk monitoring component. The study was quite large, 1,260 participants. They were sort of young old adults, from 60 to 77 when the study started. The intervention in itself was very, very intensive, and it lasted for 2 years because we thought that you need quite long intervention to change the lifestyle in a way that it would perhaps, hopefully, last after the intervention period as well. The main result after 2 years was that the cognitive function of these participants was improved and 25% more in the intervention group. This was the first trial showing that when you change the lifestyle, you actually can affect cognition. And this has created quite a lot of interest since then. Now, 2 years is really, really short to see any effect on dementia, so that's why we are conducting at the moment follow-up of this cohort to see if this positive effect on cognition will also translate into reduced risk of dementia later on. We have tried to look in the FINGER trial if there were some groups of people who would benefit more than the others, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of subgroups that are different. Everybody seems to benefit sort of equally, regardless of their age, sex, education, or risk factor background, or even genetic risk at baseline. The intervention is quite broad, so we are thinking that it might have effects on something else, not just cognition. And so far, we have reported that the intervention had a beneficial effect also on health-related quality of life, on mobility and activities of daily living, and also it reduced the risk of developing new chronic diseases. So it seems to have quite broad effects. Then more about the dietary intervention. Dietary intervention, it was done as a combination of individual and group sessions. It was actually inspired a lot from the diabetes prevention study. Many of the components were similar. We had some same people also working in that trial. We were learning from what they had done before. We had individual sessions where the focus was really to see what were the personal challenges of each participant, what should they do, setting personal goals, and then following up. Group sessions were then had quite broad topics. For example, tasting bread and trying to see which one is more salty and which one is less, or reading food labels in a supermarket, or how to make my favorite recipe a little bit more healthy. It's kind of very, very concrete and practical advice. Main part of the intervention was done during the first year, and then in the second year there were only 2 maintenance sessions. The dietary intervention was, we didn't offer any magic bullet, there is none. So it was based on the Nordic dietary recommendations. Based on the observational evidence of nutrients that are good for cognition, there was a little bit more emphasis on these aspects that are highlighted here in green. So there was a bit more emphasis on fruits and vegetables, on whole grains, on vegetable oils and fish. More details of these sessions and this dietary part in general can be found in this publication from last year. It was also describing what happened to the diet of these participants during the intervention. Diet was measured using 3-day food records at baseline, year 1 and year 2. And we were just looking at how well these people adhered to these recommendations, dietary recommendations. They could score from 0 to 9, depending on how many of the dietary recommendations they met. So 9 was a good score. If you look at the line below, that's the control group. There's no change during the whole time. Their diet remains fairly the same. In the intervention group, you see improvement at year 1. It's a little bit less at year 2, where the intervention also was much less intensive, but still the groups were different also at 2 years. We were also a little bit investigating if the fact that how much did they participate in these dietary sessions was important. And we saw that those people who participated only from 0 to 4 sessions, they did improve at year 1, but they remained to the control level at year 2, while those people who were participating more were also sort of keeping up with the good changes. This is very new analysis, not yet published, but in press. We were trying to see if, for the first time ever, if you change a diet, do you change cognition? So it was sort of a, we're trying to a little bit see the impact of diet in this multi-domain intervention. When we were looking at the NTB, which was this our primary outcome, it was sort of a global cognitive test battery, we could see that people who were reporting having a healthier diet already at the study baseline, those were the ones that we could see a sort of more favorable cognitive change at the follow-up. But here we didn't see an association between the change in diet and change in cognition. But for executive function, we actually did. Executive function was one of our pre-specified cognitive outcomes, secondary outcomes. So here we see that in the intervention group, those who actually were able to improve their diet, those actually also improved in their executive function. And this is a first report of this sort. I will just really briefly say something about people with prodromal Alzheimer's disease. These are persons who don't have dementia yet, but have really high risk of developing. They have some biomarkers already, and these are people that we see a lot in the memory clinics, but we really don't have anything to offer them. In this lipid diet study, it investigated this multinutrient compound to see if this would prevent cognitive decline in this very high-risk population. It was very similar. It has a similar outcome as in finger. The primary outcome was negative. They did not see an effect, but they did see some beneficial effects on secondary outcomes, on cognition, cognition and function measure, CDR sum of boxes, and on brain volumes. And in an ongoing trial that is called MIND-AD, this is also high-risk people with prodromal Alzheimer's disease. So we are testing what if we combine the finger-like lifestyle intervention with this nutraceutical product. Does this help these really high-risk people? It's an ongoing trial, so we don't have results, but I think it's an interesting thing because people who have really high risk might need something additional as well. Following the finger results, there's been a lot of interest to carry out similar studies in other countries. Currently, there's a trial starting in the US. We are collaborating with them very closely. They are testing the finger model in US. There's MIND China. It's a little bit more modified because the challenges are a bit different. There's Singer in Singapore and also study in Australia. And a lot of new countries are also joining this Worldwide Fingers initiative. And I think it's really important that we are sort of trying to harmonize the methods and really create more evidence and more robust evidence. And in the years to come, I think we know much more about the possibilities to prevent dementia with lifestyle interventions. So this is the last slide without my take-home points. Healthy diet, it's beneficial for the brain. We have lots of evidence from observational studies, and now we start to have evidence emerging also from trial settings. Dementia prevention, it should start early. But it's also possible. We saw in finger, you can change diet also among older adults, and it can lead to benefits also on cognition. So it's never too early, but it's not too late either, even among older adults. We speak about multifactorial condition. So diet is important, but we need multifactorial interventions. Those might be the optimal way to go. And one size does not fit all. So there might be people who are more vulnerable or who need more support or who need tailoring. So I think this is the future where we are going, that we learn more on how to tailor these interventions so that it will be optimal for each individual. But to say it in a really simple way, what is good for the heart, it's good for the brain as well. Thank you.